Dr. Phil raised his hand. The cameras stopped. And in that moment, 200 people in the studio held their breath as one silent confession changed everything. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a breakdown. It was something far more powerful, a look. A single glance that carried the weight of years of buried truth. And Dr. Phil, in 3 decades of facing humanity's darkest moments, knew instantly that what was about to unfold would require something he rarely does, stopping everything. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back. Back to the beginning of what seemed like just another episode. Back to when Sarah Miller walked onto that stage with a secret so heavy, even silence couldn't hide it. 3 weeks earlier, the Dr. Phil show received a letter. Not an email, not a phone call, an actual handwritten letter. In an age where everything moves digitally, someone had taken the time to put pen to paper. The handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged in places as if tears had fallen while writing. Dear Dr. Phil, my name is Sarah Miller. I'm 34 years old, and I've been lying to everyone I love for the past 8 years. I don't know how to stop. I don't know if I even can. But I know that if I don't face this truth soon, I'm going to lose everything. Please help me. The production team gets thousands of requests every month. But something about Sarah's letter stood out. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't attention-seeking. It was raw, honest, and terrifying in its simplicity. Dr. Phil read it himself, and within 48 hours Sarah was booked. When Sarah arrived at the studio that Tuesday morning, she looked exactly like someone carrying a devastating secret, exhausted, pale, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Her hands trembled slightly as she signed the release forms. A producer asked if she was okay. She nodded but didn't speak. In the green room, Sarah sat alone, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind. She had imagined what she would say, how she would say it, the words she would use to finally release the truth that had been choking her for years. But now, sitting there under the fluorescent lights, surrounded by the hum of studio activity, she felt her resolve crumbling. What if she couldn't do it? What if the words refused to come? What if, after all this, she stayed silent? The studio lights came up. Dr. Phil walked onto the stage. And Sarah Miller realized there was no turning back. The audience applauded as Dr. Phil took his seat. He had his usual confident demeanor, that mix of authority and warmth that had made him America's therapist for over 2 decades. He glanced at his notes, then looked directly at Sarah. Sarah, thank you for being here. I know this wasn't an easy decision. Sarah nodded. Her throat felt tight. You wrote to me about a lie you've been living with for 8 years. A lie that's affecting your marriage, your relationship with your children, and your own mental health. Are you ready to talk about it? Sarah opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She tried again. Still nothing. The silence stretched for 5 seconds, then 10. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Phil leaned forward slightly, his expression softening. Take your time, he said gently. There's no rush. But Sarah knew the truth. There was a rush. Every second she stayed silent was another second the lie continued. Another second her husband lived in the dark. Another second her children grew up not knowing who their mother really was. She took a breath and began. My husband, Mark, thinks I'm a pediatric nurse. He's thought that for our entire marriage. When we met 8 years ago, I told him I worked at Children's Hospital. I described my shifts, my patients, even made up stories about saving lives. He was so proud of me. He told everyone about his wife, the nurse who helped sick children. Dr. Phil's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. He sensed where this was going. But you're not a nurse, he said quietly. Sarah shook her head. Tears were streaming down her face now. I'm a cashier at a grocery store. I've been working at the same supermarket for 9 years. I stock shelves. I scan items. I help customers find products. That's what I do. That's who I am. The audience gasped. Not loudly, but the collective intake of breath was audible throughout the studio. Dr. Phil sat back slightly, processing what he just heard. "So for 8 years of marriage, you've been maintaining this lie. How?" Sarah wiped her eyes with a tissue provided by a producer. "I leave for work before he wakes up. I come home when I say my shift ends. I bought scrubs online and sometimes change into them before coming home. I learned medical terminology from TV shows and Google. I created an entirely fake life, and he believed every word because why wouldn't he? Why would anyone think their wife would lie about something so fundamental?" Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Dr. Phil leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. This was his signature pose when things got serious, when he needed to cut through the performance and get to the truth. "Sarah, help me understand something. This isn't just a small lie that got out of control. This is an architectural deception. You've built an entire false identity. Why?" Sarah's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Because when I met Mark, he was everything I thought I could never have. He's educated, successful, from a good family. And I'm just a girl who dropped out of college, who couldn't figure out her life, who was ashamed of where she ended up. When he asked what I did, I panicked. And I said the first impressive thing that came to mind. And then it spiraled," Dr. Phil said. "And then it spiraled," Sarah confirmed. "One lie led to another. When he wanted to meet my coworkers, I said they were all at a conference. When he asked about my schedule, I memorized real nursing shifts. When he wanted to visit me at work, I said the hospital had strict visitor policies. Every question, every curiosity, I had to build another layer of the lie." Dr. Phil was silent for a moment, and in that silence, something shifted in the studio. The energy changed. Because everyone watching, both in the audience and at home, suddenly understood that this wasn't just about a lie. This was about identity, shame, and the lengths people go to be loved. "Does Mark know you're here today?" Dr. Phil asked. Sarah nodded. "He knows I'm on the show. But he doesn't know why. I told him it was about anxiety, which isn't entirely a lie. I am anxious. Constantly. I live in terror that he'll find out. That someone from my real work will see me somewhere. That someone from his world will walk into my grocery store." Dr. Phil nodded slowly. "Sarah, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me. Are you listening?" Sarah looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. "I'm listening. What you've done is serious. It's a betrayal of trust, and there will be consequences. But the fact that you're here, the fact that you're ready to face this, tells me something important. You haven't lost yourself completely. The woman who wrote that letter to me, the woman sitting in front of me right now, that's the real Sarah. Not the fake nurse. Not the woman pretending to be someone she's not. You." Sarah broke down. Her shoulders shook with sobs. A producer moved to step in, but Dr. Phil held up his hand. He stood up, walked over to Sarah, and knelt down beside her chair. "Look at me," he said softly. She did. "You are enough. Just as you are. Not as some invented version of yourself, but as the real Sarah Miller. The woman who stocks shelves and helps customers and works hard every single day. That woman is worthy of love. Do you understand me?" Sarah couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears flowing freely. But then something happened that no one in the room expected. Not the producers. Not the audience. Not even Dr. Phil himself. Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. She held it out toward Dr. Phil, her arm trembling. Dr. Phil took it, confusion crossing his face. "What's this?" Sarah's voice was barely audible. "There's more." The studio went completely silent. The kind of silence that feels physical, that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Dr. Phil looked at the envelope, then back at Sarah. "More?" he repeated carefully. Sarah nodded. And then, in a voice that cracked with the weight of years of suppressed truth, she said, "The nursing lie isn't the worst thing I've done. Dr." Phil stood up slowly. He glanced at the envelope in his hand, then at Sarah, then at the cameras. And in that moment, he made a decision that would change the entire trajectory of the episode. He raised his hand. "Stop the tape." The cameras immediately cut. The red recording lights went dark. The audience froze. Production assistants looked at each other in confusion. In 20 years of the Drive Phil show, he had only stopped tape a handful of times, and never without a clear emergency. Dr. Phil turned to his lead producer, standing just off stage. "Clear the audience." "What?" The producer stepped forward. "Dr. Phil, we're in the middle of—" "I said clear the audience." Now. There was no room for debate in his voice. Within minutes, the confused audience was being ushered out of the studio. Sarah sat frozen in her chair, the envelope now in Dr. Phil's hand. Once the studio was empty except for essential crew, Dr. Phil sat back down. "Sarah," he said quietly, "before I open this, I need you to tell me, is anyone in immediate danger?" She shook her head. "No. But if this comes out, my life as I know it is over." Dr. Phil looked at the envelope for a long moment. Then he carefully opened it. Inside was a single photograph and a folded piece of paper. He looked at the photograph first, and his expression changed immediately. He set it face down on the table, then unfolded the paper and read. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Dr. Phil looked up. "Sarah, how long have you known about this?" 5 years. "And you've never told anyone?" "No one. Not Mark. Not my family. No one." Dr. Phil set the paper down carefully, as if it might break. "This isn't just about the nursing lie anymore. This is about your daughter." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah's face crumpled, and she covered it with her hands. Her whole body shook with sobs that came from somewhere so deep, it was as if her soul was breaking. Dr. Phil's voice was gentle but firm. "You need to tell me everything. Right now. No more secrets." And then Sarah spoke. And what she revealed in that empty studio, with only Dr. Phil and a skeleton crew present, was something that would require not just his expertise, but his humanity. "When I got pregnant with Emma, Mark was so happy. We'd been trying for 2 years. But I knew there was a chance." She couldn't finish. Dr. Phil waited. "During a work shift, before I told anyone I was pregnant, a man came through my checkout line. Someone I hadn't seen in years. Someone from before Mark. We talked. And that night, I made the worst mistake of my life." Dr. Phil's expression didn't change, but his eyes showed understanding. "Emma might not be Mark's biological daughter." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. "And the photograph?" Dr. Phil gestured to the image lying face down. "I took it at Emma's 5th birthday party. She was playing with my phone and accidentally opened my hidden photos. She found a picture of him. The other man. And she looked at it, and then she looked at me, and she said, 'Mommy, why do you have a picture of the man who looks like me?'" Dr. Phil paused mid-sentence. The studio, already empty of audience, felt even more hollow. This wasn't just a confession anymore. This was a crisis. Dr. Phil stood up and walked a few steps away, his hand on his chin, thinking. Then he turned back to Sarah. "Have you done a paternity test?" "No. I'm too afraid. If it confirms what I suspect, I lose everything. Mark will leave. Emma will hate me. My family will disown me. But if I never know, I live with this torture forever." Dr. Phil came back and sat down, but this time even closer to Sarah. "Let me tell you what's going to happen. First, we're going to get you to see a therapist today. Not tomorrow, not next week. Today. Second, we're going to figure out the truth, because living in this limbo is killing you. And third, you're going to face this with support, not alone. Do you understand?" Sarah nodded weakly. "But Dr. Phil, What about Mark? What about Emma? That, Dr. Phil said carefully, is something we'll navigate together. But Sarah, you have to understand, the truth is going to come out. It always does. The question is whether it comes out on your terms, with support and a plan, or whether it explodes at the worst possible moment. Sarah's voice was small, broken. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Dr. Phil leaned forward and looked her directly in the eyes. You wrote me that letter. You got on a plane. You sat in that chair. You've already shown more strength than most people ever will. Now we finish what you started. He stood up and gestured to his team off camera. Get Dr. Lawson on the phone. And get Mark on standby. Sarah's going to need to make the hardest call of her life, but she won't do it alone. Sarah looked up at him, terrified but no longer drowning. What if he leaves me? Then you'll survive it. Because the truth, no matter how painful, is the only foundation worth building a life on. And Sarah? He placed the envelope in her hands. You're not the lie anymore. Starting today, you're the woman brave enough to face it. 3 months later, Sarah returned to the show. This time, with Mark beside her. The paternity test had been done. Emma was Mark's daughter. But the 8 years of lies had still nearly destroyed them. Therapy, boundaries, rebuilding trust, it was all still ongoing. But Sarah was no longer hiding. And that, Dr. Phil told the audience that day, was the real victory. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Because sometimes the most powerful confession isn't spoken. It's the moment when silence finally breaks, and the truth is allowed to breathe.